Hey everyone, this is Cheyenne, and I'm going to be talking to you guys today about post-colonial literature. So, I'm going to start by building a little background and talking first about colonialism. Colonialism occurred when the Europeans decided that they were going to go off and explore other countries and establish colonies on those continents. So they ended up establishing colonies in other countries or continents such as Africa, South Asia, South America, and in North America. And so when they landed there and they started to colonize, what the colonizers did was they took the native people's land, their resources, everything that they possibly could. Think the Native Americans when the British came here to America, they started to take away their culture, and in turn, they justified their actions of coming and taking over as claiming that the natives were savages and that they were uncivilized and they needed to be civilized. So, therefore, the colonizer's job was to civilize them, to give them language, to dress them properly, to teach them proper etiquette, and to kind of impose their culture onto the natives. So, what were some of the issues once the colonizers decided to pick up, leave, and decolonize these countries? Well, when colonizers left, they left behind a deeply embedded cultural colonization, meaning the inculcation of a British system of government and education, British culture, and British values that denigrate the culture, morals, and even physical appearance of formerly subjugated peoples, according to Tyson from the chapter that we had to read this week. So, in other words, what that means is when they left, when the colonizers gave them their culture, in turn, when they left, it kind of resulted in a loss of culture. People were at a loss of what language was correct, what religion was correct, because there was a mix of all of it. An example that I talked about in my discussion post is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was colonized by Britain, and in the 80s or 70s or 80s, Britain decided that they were going to decolonize, go back to Britain, and leave Sri Lanka to kind of figure it out on their own. And what ended up happening was the two major ethnic groups, the Sinhalese and the Tamil, ended up having a civil war that lasted over 20 years. It just ended in 2006 over who was right. They fought over the language, they fought over religion, they fought over politics. And it all stemmed because the Sinhalese were the major group, and they started by passing certain laws that the main language should be Sinhalese, and it kind of started discriminating against the Tamil, and it led to all sorts of conflict within the two ethnic groups. So post-colonial literature, like I said when talking about Sri Lanka, it stems from those formerly colonized countries that have been decolonized, and it addresses the problems and consequences of decolonization in a country. Some of the common themes that can be seen are cultural identity, nationalism, trauma, colonization, struggles of decolonization, challenging stereotypes set by colonizers, othering, or when the colonizers' treatment of indigenous cultures is not fully human. So sort of how the British, when they came to America, labeled the Native Americans as savage, and it kind of labeled them as not human. And then mimicry. So once the colonizers were gone, the remaining natives were kind of trying to mimic the culture that was left behind and make it fit into their own culture. And then exile. So sort of like what happens when you're disagreeing with what's going on. So some well-known post-colonial authors. I pulled these from the Tyson chapter. So there's Chinua Achebe from Nigeria, Jamaica Kincaid of Antigua, West Indies, Bharati Mukherjee from India, Dangarembga from Zimbabwe, Leslie Marmon Silko of Laguna Pueblo tribe of the United States, Edward Kamal Brathwaite from Barbados, Arundhati Roy from India, Ngugi wa Thiong'o from Kenya, and of course the author that is discussed in this week's article, Salman Rushdie from India. So, I'm going to start by giving a little bit of background about Salman Rushdie before jumping into the article and before discussing Midnight Children. So, Salman Rushdie was born in Mumbai, India on July 19th, 1947, and he came from a Muslim family. For his education, he studied and got his degree at Cambridge University, and he's a very prolific post-colonial writer. He's written quite a few novels during his career. And some of his novels sparked anger from politicians, and he even received death threats for some of his novels, including that he had a fatwa issued against him after writing the Satanic Verses. And what a fatwa is it's a religious edict that called for his execution. Some of his more well-known novels are Grimace, Midnight Children, the one that we read about this week, Shame, The Satanic Verses, Imaginary Homelands, Haroun and the Sea of Stories, and The Moor's Last Sigh. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Midnight Children and give you a little bit of background. So Midnight Children was published in 1981, and in it, Rushdie utilizes magical realism and metafiction. According to an article that I read about Midnight Children, the text is a hybrid text that crosses elements of the Indian oral tradition with a critique of earlier British writers such as E.M. Forster and Paul Scott. And it was criticized by Indian politicians such as Indira Gandhi, a member of the Indian National Congress, and I'll talk more about that a little later on in my presentation. And your main character of Midnight Children is Salim Sinai. He's born during the moment India achieves its independence, and after sort of a freak accident, his hearing is altered where he kind of serves as a radio of other children's voices. So Midnight Children is an important and influential post-colonial text. Like I said, it focuses on the voices of children born like Salim in the midnight hour of India's independence. So this text, Midnight Children, it made fun of and kind of criticized the India Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, which is why it angered her by kind of having her represented as the widow within the story. And Midnight Children is an important and influential text because it inspired films like Gandhi and A Passage to India, as well as TV shows like The Jewel in the Crown and The Far Pavilions. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump into a quick discussion of our article, Fissure Skin, Inner Ear Radio, and a Telepathic Nose, The Senses in Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children by Anki Mukherjee. So what this article is it's a Freudian analysis of Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children, meaning we're looking at like the body through an analysis of the mind. And specifically, they're examining the senses of sight, sound, and touch. And in it, Mukherjee claims in Midnight Children and his other works that Rushdie hijacks the sensorium to represent nonsensical structures of feeling. And this is a textual meditation of history, meaning that it's kind of metaphorically reflecting on the history of the time and what's going on in India after they were decolonized. So Mukherjee focuses on the theme of the senses and the way in which they capture history, saying that the senses stand in between reason and irrationality, between the mind and material phenomena, meaning that they serve as an anti-mediatory media in that they do not filter, select, or refuse data. Also, Mukherjee discusses the use of magical realism, saying how Salim serves as a radio that transmits and hears the voices of children like him in the midnight hour, so he can kind of be seen as representative of the children who were born after India's independence. So I haven't read the story, but I'm assuming this kind of represents how their parents are struggling through that. They weren't independent before, and now they're trying to gain the independence, and the children are born into the new independent country. And like I said, these voices, they mix the conflicting nationalities, ideologies, and imperatives that stem from being decolonized. So some further reading that you guys can find in the MLA research, MLA International Bibliography. You could read Behind the Violence, Hegemony, Resistance, and the World System in Third World Postcolonial Literature, Postcolonial Theory in the Arab World, Belated Engagements and Limits, English in a Postcolonial Situation, the Example of India, and Wounded Nations, Politics, and Postcolonial Literature. And also, the last one I found that seemed pretty interesting was Modernism and the Development of Postcolonial Aesthetics. So as far as postcolonial literature goes at UTEP, I'm not 100% familiar with what professors specialize in what, but I do know that Dr. Jayasuriya, for example, does have a really deep knowledge of postcolonial literature because I'm taking her class this semester, and we've been reading postcolonial literature from Sri Lanka and Africa that talks about what happened to those countries after the British decolonized there. So she's very knowledgeable of that. And then just from reading their bios, it seems like Dr. Ozia Silpinar would probably be knowledgeable, and Dr. Rolliner would also know. If you know of any other professors, please let me know. And I pulled up Goldmine to see if there are any courses that are going to be offered next semester in postcolonial literature, and from what I could tell, it doesn't seem like there's going to be anything. And thank you guys for watching.